Continuing. I'll reread the last bit. That, in substance, was the dream that Alma Warren, who grew up to be a moderately famous artist, had one February night in 1959 when she was 5 years old. Within a year, her brother Michael choked to death, and yet somehow got better and was back from the hospital unharmed, at home with them down Andrews Road inside a day or two, which neither he nor Alma really mentioned afterwards, although it scared them at the time. Their father, Tommy Warren, died in 1990. Doreen, following a short while later in the sweltering summer heat of 1995. A little under 10 years after that, Mick Warren had an accident at work where he was reconditioning steel drums. Rendered unconscious in a slapstick way and only woken by cold jets of water that workmates were using to sluice caustic dust out of his eyes, Mick was returned to life this second time with a variety of troubling thoughts inside his head. Strange memories turned up to the surface while he'd been knocked out. Some of the things he thought that he remembered were so odd that they couldn't possibly have happened, and Mick started to become concerned that he was taking on the feared and thus unmentioned trait that simmered in the family blood, that he was going cornering. When he'd at last worked up the nerve to tell his wife, Kath, of his fears, she'd straightway suggested that he talk to Alma. Kathy's family, like Mick's, had been evicted from the grime fields of the Burrows, the square mile of dirt down by the railway station, when the council had the final remnants of the area cleared away during the early 1970s. Solid and sensible, and yet proud of her eccentricities, Kath had those qualities that Mick recalled the Burrows women having: the decisiveness, an unshakable faith in intuition, in their ability to know what it was best to do in any given circumstance, no matter how peculiar. They sounded like great gals. Kathy and Alma got on like a house on fire, despite or possibly because of their vast differences, with Kathy openly regarding Alma as a mad witch who lived in a rubbish tip, and Alma scathing in return about her sister in law's fondness for Mick Hucknall out of Simply Red. Is that a British thing? That sounds British. Nevertheless, the women harbored nothing but respect towards each other in their separate fields of expertise, and when Kath recommended that her husband have a word with Alma if he thought that he was going radio rental, Mick knew that this was because his wife believed his older sister to be an authority on having not just lost the plot, but having willfully flushed the entire script down the shitter. Furthermore, he knew that she was more than likely right. He made a date to meet with Alma for a drink that following Saturday, and for no reason that he could articulate, arranged to see her in the Golden Lion on Castle Street, one of the few surviving pubs out of the dozens that the Burrows had in its day boasted, and coincidentally where he'd met Kath when she was working there before he'd lived in the dream by marrying, or before he'd lived the dream by marrying the barmaid. So it's a golden lion. Okay. More yellow and more God. Even on a Saturday these days, he found out when he rendezvoused with Alma, the once packed establishment was all but empty. Evidently, the flat dwelling residents remaining in the gutted neighborhood, who weren't confined to their front bedrooms by an ASBO, usually preferred to head up to the sick and spunk and stabbing friendly zoo of the town center rather than endure the mortuary still of premises closer to home. His sister sat there at a corner table in her uniformly black ensemble: jeans, vest, boots, and leather jacket. Black, Alma had recently explained to Mick, was the new iPod. She was nursing fizzy mineral water whilst trying to balance a round Strongbow beer mat on its edge, watched with what looked to Mick like clinical depression by the man behind the bar. The only customer that he had in all night, and it was a teetotal ugly bird. That's rather harsh. Dear narrator, that was harsh. Signed, reader. Other than to her face, Mick would admit that Alma was what you'd call striking more than ugly, even at this late stage in the game. What was she, 51 now? 50? Striking, definitely, if by that you meant actually frightening. She was 5'11", 1 inch shorter than her brother, but in heels was 6 feet 2. It depends on the heels, to be perfectly honest. Her long uncut brown hair, that grayed to dusty copper here and there, hanging like safety curtains to each side of her high cheekboned face, in a style Mick had heard her once describe as bomb sight creeper. Then, of course, there were her eyes, spooky and massive when they weren't myopically screwed shut, with warm slate irises. Gray, right? Warm slate is gray. What? Warm slate. Against which an extraterrestrial citrus yellow flared around the pupil like a full eclipse, thick lashes creaking from the weight of her mascara. Is she like a vampire with like gray and yellow eyes? She'd had across the years at least her fair share of admirers, but the truth was that the great majority of men found Alma to be generally alarming. In the words of one acquaintance, or a fucking menopausal nightmare, in the blunter phrasing of another. Although even this was said in what seemed almost an admiring tone. Yeah, I know that feeling. Mick sometimes thought his sister was just the wrong side of beautiful, but it was funnier if he insisted that she looked like Lou Reed on the cover of Transformer or a solarized glam Frankenstein, as Alma had with glee reworked it, saying that she'd use it in the catalog biography next time she had an exhibition of her paintings. Reveling in the receipt or dishing out of insults with an equal verve, Alma could more than hold her own, maintaining with deadpan sincerity that her angelically good-looking young brother had been simpering and effeminate since birth, had actually been born a girl, was even chosen as Miss Pears at one point, but then underwent a sex change operation since their mom and dad had wanted one of each. She'd first tried this painfully earnest routine out on Mick himself when he was 6 and she was 9, reducing him to mortified, bewildered tears. Once, when he told her, not entirely with that accuracy, that she came across to people as a homosexual man trapped in a rough approximation of a woman's body, she had said, "Yeah, but so do you," then laughed until she coughed and ultimately retched, inordinately pleased, as usual, by her own bon mot. Stopping off at the bar to wrap a fist around the pleasing icicle of his first pint, he made his way over a threadbare floral patterned carpet like a diagram of suicide towards his sister's chosen table. Excuse me. Maybe I'm allergic to this description. Diagram floral patterned carpet like a diagram of suicide. Floral patterned carpet like a diagram of suicide. It's like, I guess, a blood stain from if you killed yourself on the carpet, or is it more a matter of having a floral patterned carpet is the sort of thing that's apt to lead one to consider suicide seriously enough to finally follow through with it? I can see that. I mean, floral patterned carpet. It's one thing if we're talking about like an Afghan rug, those things are intricate and beautiful, but the typical floral patterned carpet is trying to kill you. I think that's reasonable. Okay. Towards his sister's chosen table, unsurprisingly located in the empty lounge's furthest angle from its door, the misanthrope's retreat of choice. Perhaps a corner. If we found one? Ladies and gentlemen, is this the first corner? Alma looked up as he scraped back a chair to sit opposite her across the wet veneer with its sparse archipelago of beer mats. She rolled out her usual smile of greeting, which he thought was probably intended to give the impression that her face lit up to see him. But since Alma's tendency to overdo things was extended to her grand guignol theater of expressions, I don't know what a grand guignol is. I guess it's guignol. Is it another one of those French terms? There's a lot of French on this page. The effect was more one of religiously themed murderous or pyromaniac, that burst of yellow arson in the center of each eye. She sounds like a really cool lady, actually. Well, if it isn't Worry Warren, how in God's name are you, Worry? Should she be more British? I don't know. Alma's voice was smoke cured to an ominous bass organ chord reverberating in a Gothic church, at times even a little deeper than Mick's own. He grinned despite his current mental health concerns and felt sincerely glad to see his sister reestablishing all their arcane connections, being with somebody comfortingly further gone than he was. Mick took out his cigarettes and lighter, placing them beside his beaded glass in preparation for the evening as he answered her. Just about had it, Worry, if you want the truth. Each of the pair had called each other Worry since a moment during 1966, of which neither had any clear, reliable memory. Alma, 13, may have begun it all by using Worry as a ridiculing term when speaking to her younger brother, and he may have hurled it back at her because, as she had always privately suspected, he was far too frivolous in his essential attitude towards existence to make up an insult of his own, even a stupid one like Worry. I sympathize with that. Once the pair had taken up referring to each other in this way, it would have all become an idiotic war of wills that neither could remember why they were involved in, but where neither felt that they could be the first to call the other by their given name without conceding an unthinkable defeat. This nominative tennis match had carried on, pathetically, for the remainder of their lives, long after they'd begun to find the cognomen affectionate. Cognomen, give me a break. And had forgotten utterly its half baked origins. If asked why they both called each other Worry, Mick would usually reply that coming as they did from an insolvent background in the boroughs, Mum and Dad had been unable to afford a nickname for each child, so that they'd had to make do with just one between them. Not like posh kids, as he'd sometimes add with an authentic tone of bitterness. If Alma were around, she'd look up at their audience with an accusing veal calf stare and solemnly instruct them not to laugh. That name was all we got for Christmas one year. Now his sister planted the grazed leather of her elbows in the film of liquid covering their table. The table is wet. I mean, this doesn't make much sense. It sounds like the bar isn't really in use. Cupped her chin between long fingers and leaned forward through the weak tea atmosphere inquiringly, head to one side so that the longer locks of hair dragged through the table's wet meniscus. Again, okay. Tips becoming sharp as sable brushes. It's apparently like a puddle. Truth? Why would I want the truth? I was just making conversation, Worry. I weren't asking for the Iliad. I mean, that's an interesting choice, don't you think? It's the Odyssey that usually people go to. Anyway, they both admired her callousness, and then Mick told her how he'd had the accident at work, had been knocked out, and had his face burned, had been blinded for an hour or two, and had been worried ever since that he was going mad. Alma looked at him pityingly, then shook her disproportionately massive head and sighed. Oh, Worry, everything's about you, isn't it? I've been dog rough, half blind, and barking mad for years, but you don't catch me going on about it. Whereas you catch one face full of corrosive chemicals for cleaning battleships, you fall to bits. Mick put his fag out in the ashtray's sea blue porthole and then lit another. It's not funny, Worry. I've been having weird thoughts since I woke up in the yard with everybody trying to hose me down. It's not so much the stuff that got in my me eyes. Uh, do I have to do this as British? It's not so much the stuff I got in me eyes or having banged me head. It's when I come round. For a minute, it was like I'd got no memory of being 49 or working down the reconditioning yard. I'd got no memory of Kathy or the lads or anything. He paused and sipped his lager. Alma sat across the sopping table, gazing flatly at him, paying genuine attention now that she knew that he was serious. Mick carried on. The thing is, when I first come round, I'd got it in me head that I was 3 and waking up in hospital. That time I had the cough sweet when me throat was swelled up. Alma's defiantly unplucked brows tightened to a puzzled frown. The time you choked and dog next door drove you up Grafton Street over the mounts to hospital, sat in his vegetable lorry. We all thought that's probably where you contracted brain damage, or at least I did. I didn't get brain damage. Oh, come on, you must have done. 3 minutes without oxygen, and that's your lot. They all said you weren't breathing, right from Andrews Road to Cheyne Walk and Cheney Walk? No, whatever. And that has to be 10 minutes in a rusty truck like Doug's. The rust on the track affects the speed. That makes sure. 10 minutes without breathing, and you're talking brain death, mate. Mick laughed into his pint and flecked his nose with foam. And you're supposed to be an intellectual, Rory. Try 10 minutes without breathing sometime, and I think you'll find that it's all over. Death. That silenced both of them and made them think for a few moments without reaching any practical conclusions. At last, Mick resumed his narrative. That was a necessary sentence, according to the person who wrote this. So what I'm saying is, when I woke up in the hospital when I was 3, I'd no idea of how I'd got there. I don't know your class system. I'd no memory of choking or of being in Doug's truck, although he said my eyes were open all the way. This time, I guess it's Australian now. This time, when I woke, it was different. Like I say, just for a minute, I thought I was 3 again and coming round in hospital. But this time, I remembered where I'd been. This is going to be an inconsistent accent to say the least. What, in the back of the yard with a cough sweet or a dog's truck? Nothing like that. No, I remembered I'd been in the ceiling. I'd been up there for about a fortnight eating fairies. I suppose it was a sort of a dream I had while I was out. Although it wasn't like a dream, it was more real, but it was more bizarre as well, and it was all about the burrows. Alma was by this point trying to interrupt and asking him if he knew he just said he remembered the ceiling eating fairies for a fortnight, or did he assume he'd only thought it? Mick ignored her and went on to tell her his entire adventure, the recaptured memory of which had so disturbed him. By its end, Alma sat slack-jawed and unspeaking, staring in amazement at her brother with those medicated panda eyes. Okay. At last, she ventured her first serious comment of the night. That's not a dream, mate. That's a vision. Earnestly, for once, the pair resumed their talk there in the gloom of the bereft pub lounge, replenishing their drinks at intervals, with Alma sticking to the mineral water, her preferred drug being the half-dozen Bounty bar-sized slabs of hashish strewn about her monstrous flat up on East Park Parade. About them, as they sat, the Golden Lion was steeping in the opposite of hubbub, anti-clamor dominated by the wall clock's mortal thud. It's yes, it was empty, right? What's all the wet tabletop shit? The brightness of the bar shine fluctuated subtly at times, as if the absences of all the missing customers were milling through the room, brown and translucent like old celluloid. Okay, that's nice. Occasionally overlapping with enough of their fly-specked non-bodies to occlude the light, if only imperceptibly. For hours, Mick and his sister spoke through about the burrows and about their dreams, with Alma telling Mick the one she'd had about the lit-up shop in the deserted market, where the carpenters were hammering through the night. Oh, good. So another character now knows about this, and we can refer back to it later. She even told him how, within the dream, she'd thought about another dream she'd previously had, the one where Doreen had said pigeons were where people went when they were dead, although Alma admitted that upon awakening, she'd not been sure if this were something that she'd really dreamed, or really dreamed she'd dreamed. Eventually, when some while later, they stepped out into the gusty shock of Castle Street, Alma was thrumming with excited energy, and Mick was luminously pissed. Things were much better after talking to his sister and enduring her enthusiastic ranting. As they walked down Castle Street to Fitzroy Street, through the ghost neighborhood, Alma was talking about how she planned to do a whole new run of paintings based on Mick's near-death experience, which she'd by now convinced herself that his recovered memory really was, and her own dreams. She mocked her brother's fears for his own sanity as just one more example of his girlishness, his terror-stricken unfamiliarity with anything resembling creative thought. Your problem, Rory, is you have an idea and you think it's a cerebral hemorrhage. Listening to her spooling out impractical and transcendental picture concepts like a hyperventilating ticker tape, he felt the weight lift from him, floating in a sweet and putrid lager fart to dissipate beneath the starry, vast obsidian pudding bowl of closing time, inverted and set down upon the burrows as though keeping flies away. Down from the Golden Lion's front doorway and its carious sage green tiles they stumbled, with, across the vehicle-forsaken street upon their right, the fading 1930s Chinese puzzle of scab-textured brick that was the rear of Bath Street Flats St. Peter's House, breaks in the waist-high border wall allowing access to triangular stone stairways shaped like ziggurats, steps dropping from the apex to the base at either side. Do you have a picture of this? I wouldn't if I hadn't already seen photos of it based on these words. Past that, there were the flats themselves, with chiseled slots of Bauhaus shadow, double doors recessed beneath their porticos, gauze cataracted windows, most of them unlit. I think those are curtains. That sounds like curtains to me. Police car sirens skirled like radiophonic workshop banshees. Obviously, stereotypically, I would say, from the floodplains of St. James End, west of the river, And Mick thought about his recent revelation, realizing that despite the uplift of his sister's fervid, near fanatical response, there was still a hard kernel of unease residing in the pit of him, albeit sunk beneath a lake of numbing amber slosh. Seeming to catch his shift of mood, Alma broke off her rapturous description of exquisite landscapes she had yet to capture and looked past him in the same direction he was looking at the backside of the silent and benighted flats. Yeah, that's a problem, isn't it? Not what if war is going round the corner, but what if he's not? If what you saw means what I think it does, then that thing over there is what we've really got to deal with. Alma nodded to the dark flats and, by implication, Bath Street, running unseen down their furthest side. Now's a good time to mention that the um, front cover of this book has a map on the back of it, and I didn't quite understand why that was significant until now. The business that you saw when you were with the gang of dead kids, the destructor and all that, that's what we're up against. That's why I'd better make these paintings great to change the world before it's all completely fucked. Mick glanced at Alma dubiously. Dubiously. It's too late, sis, don't you think? Look at all this. He gestured drunkenly around them as they reached the bottom of the rough trapezium of hunched up ground called Castle Hill, where it joined what was left of Fitzroy Street. This last was now a broadened driveway leading down to the shoebox stack of 60s housing where the feudal corridors of Moat Street, Ford Street, and the rest once stood. It terminated in a claustrophobic dead-end car park, block accommodation closing in on two sides, while the black untidy hedges, representing a last desperate stand of Burroughs' wilderness, spilled over on a third. When this meager estate had first gone up in Mick and Alma's early teenage years, the cul-de-sac had been a bruising mockery of a children's playground with a scaled-down maze of blue brick in its center, built apparently for feeble-minded leprechauns, and the autistic cubist notion of a concrete horse that grazed eternally nearby, too hard-edged and uncomfortable for any child to straddle, with its eyes an empty hole bored through its temples. I've seen those kind of things before. It's odd how playgrounds are so nightmarish. I mean, I don't get why people do that. Or I think what actually happens is we leave it to people with no imagination whatsoever, or compassion, or humanity to construct our playgrounds because everyone else is too busy doing other stuff, I guess. Even that, more like the abstract statue of a playground than an actual place, had been less awful than this date rape opportunity and likely dogging hotspot, with its hasty skim of tarmac spread like cheap, stale caviar across the pink pedestrian tiles beneath. The bumpy lanes and flagstones closes under that. Flagstone closes under that. The bumpy lanes and flagstone closes under that. Yeah, okay. So we can. It's just now we have every layer for the complete picture of what the surface is like. Only the gutter margins, where the strata peeled back into sunburned tatters, gave away the layers of human time compressed below, ring markings on the long-felled cement tree stump of the Burrows. From downhill beyond the car park and the no-frills tombstones of its sheltering apartment blocks, there came the mournful shunt and grumble of a goods train, with its yelp and mutter rolling up the valley's sides from the crisscross self-harm scarves of the rail tracks at its bottom. Railways are self-harm in an urban emotional landscape, apparently. Alma looked towards the vista Mick had indicated, tightening her thick-caked lashes into a contemptuous spaghetti western squint, so that her eyes were jumping spiders, tensing for the fatal pounce. Of course it's not too late, you girl. There's no point sending you a vision if there's nothing to be done about it, is there? And look, I'm a genius. Said so in the NME. I'll do these paintings and we'll get this sorted. Trust me. I can't tell who's talking. Is it Alma? Oh, right. Yeah, okay. That was Alma. And he did, implicitly. While it was obvious to a blind man that Mick's sister was both self-infatuated and delusional, in his experience, Alma also often turned out to be right. If she said that she could repair a cataclysm with some tubes of paint, Mick was inclined to put the money on his sister rather than the meteor strike or whatever it was had happened to the Burrows. All her life, she'd made perverse decisions that had worked out for her against all the odds, and nobody could say that Alma hadn't done well for a Burroughs kid. Mick had got faith in her, though not the wide eyed faith of her devoted audience, many of whom appeared to think of her as having origins within the region of the supernatural, or else the field of clandestine genetic research, a God sent mutation who could talk to stones and raise the unborn, let alone the dead. I can't believe you're Alma Warren's brother, he'd had more than one fan of his sister's paintings tell him. Mostly female workmates of his wife's, whom Alma was convinced only responded to her as a badly misjudged lesbian icon rather than an artist. Sometimes, if they knew Mick's background, they'd sit looking thoughtful before asking him how anyone like Alma Warren could have possibly emerged from a notorious urban soul trap like the Burroughs. He considered this a stupid question, as if there were any other place she could have come from, hell or Narnia or somewhere. How long was it since there'd been even a trace of the authentic working class, if its conspicuous products were today unrecognizable as dodos? So it's the Narnia drop is interesting. They came out of a golden lion. We're talking about Narnia, and she is from working class British background, which was the thing with the kids in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? Or maybe they were upper class. I can't even remember. How long was it since there'd been even a trace of the authentic working class, if its conspicuous products were today unrecognizable as dodos? What had happened to that culture? Other than those parts of it which had been tempted up into the low boughs of the middle classes or drained off into the cardboard jungle, how had it all vanished so that these days, if they saw it, no one had a clue what they were looking at? Where had it gone? Why hadn't somebody complained? Does this count? Are we doing that now? They'd turned left and were walking down the lowest edge of Castle Hill towards the wall of Doddridge Church, heading for Chalk Lane, Mayfair, and the cab rank of the station at the bottom. Oh, I see. Like what? A line of cabs? Is that a line of cabs, British person? On the end of their beloved Andrews Road. Alma was back to conjuring another as yet non-existent masterpiece, eyes staring fixedly into the ink-wash empty space before her, as if she already saw it framed and hanging there. I had this idea, right, when we were talking. I could do my dream, the one about the carpenters down at the corner of the market in the middle of the night. I could do something really big, a bit like Stanley Spencer, with enormous figures bent over their lathes, facing away from us. I'll do some bits in love and detail, but I'll leave the rest unfinished with like dangling pencil lines. I'll call it work in progress. Alma trailed off, stopping in her tracks to gaze up at the 18th century nonconformist church that they were passing. I'm sure that's a technical term. Set into the toffee colored stonework of its upper story was a closed, pitch painted doorway that led into empty air. Clearly a loading bay of some sort, except why would anybody need one halfway up a church? It looked as if it was intended to lead to an unseen upper floor of the impoverished district, one long since demolished without a trace, or possibly a planned extension yet to be constructed. She looked from the senseless angel door to Mick, and when she spoke, her train wreck voice was small and marveling, more like that of a little girl than when she'd been one. That's one of the places, Rory, isn't it? From in your seizure or whatever. Alma's brother nodded and then indicated the turfed over wasteland up beyond another car park on Chalk Lane, approaching to their right as they resumed their walk. Yeah, it's another, but that's like in earthworks. It's much bigger, though, and older, and the puddles have unfolded sort of into a lagoon. His sister nodded slowly, taking it all in as she surveyed the tuft of land rising behind the car crash. Crash? Its surveillance camera babysitter monitoring her charges from the litter pocket corner. There's a camera pointed at the car park. Warren Fort. She surveyed the tuft of land. She's so his sister's just taking note of the fact that there's a car park with a camera. One forked tree, or maybe a close planted pear, stretched, or maybe a close. Oh no, okay, fine. You can't tell. Fine. All right, all right. I withdraw my outrage. This is from the point of view of the observer. I keep forgetting that. Okay. Or a close planted pear, stretched up out of the mound in silhouette against the sodium lamp bleed above the nearby station. As a street lamp, trees were the enduring features of the landscape, its true face beneath the pantomime Dane crust of leisure center and dual carriageway, cosmetic affectations wiped away at intervals. Oh, okay, he's talking about cutting down trees. The oak and elm defined the view across great tracts of time, were vital structural elements, constant as clouds, and like the clouds, mostly unnoticed. Constant as clouds? So not constant, only semi constant. Constant as a phenomenon, but not as an individual configuration. Do you get it? It's a very compact description in the midst of sprawl. As they reached the top of Chalk Lane, to the east past Doddridge Church, on its grass hillock were the flats and houses of St. Mary's Street, where the Great Fire was started, and past that the traffic rush of Horse Market, running uphill to void into the dead Monoxide Junction, where the mayor hold used to be. Monoxide Junction, huh? It's full of traffic, I guess. Ahead of them, the crack of Chalk Lane dipped through darkness, south and down to Mayfair's headlight ribbon, with the devil-decorated eaves of Peter's Church across the way, an Ibis Hotel and a attendant entertainment complex up towards town on the left. Uh, that's just for your information. A neon tumor styled by the Fabergé. This had been raised upon the site of the demolished Barclaycard headquarters, previously an endearing tangle of small businesses and hairline alleyways. Pike Lane, Court Pot Lane, Doddridge Street, and long before that, a royal residence that governed Mercia, and with it, most of grunting Saxon England. There weren't ghosts here. There were fossil seams of ghosts, one stacked upon another, and compressed down to an emotive coal or oil, black and combustible. It's a ghost-based hydrocarbon, is what he's describing. Alma tried to imagine, yeah, sorry. Alma tried to imagine the whole listing quarter right from Peter's Way to Regent Square, from Andrews Road to Sheep Street and St. Sepulchre's. A petrifying sight of Boar, still with the jutting tower block arrows that impaled and brought it down, still with its street lamp bristles and its alehouse crackling. Tried imagining it all in context of mixed vision, as if the distressed topography and broken signs still plugged into something humming and impalpable. Some legendary machinery long disappeared, but still perhaps in working order. We're getting into a Jules Verne sort of mode here, or no, the Time Machine, H.G. Wells. This is like the Morlocks are in the Burrows. It was awesome, and it made her need a joint. Campaigners said it wasn't possible to get addicted to old-fashioned hashish, but to Alma's way of thinking, they just couldn't have been trying. They stepped out of Chalk Lane onto Black Lion Hill. Okay, we got a different lion now. A million years of gradient presided over by 400 years of public house at the arse end of Mayfair. By the alley mouth, there had been another paper shop where Alma, from the age of 7, had bought comics for their pictures, garish flotsam shipped here from America as ballast, with skyscraper scented pages and electrifying banners. Journey into Mystery, Forbidden Worlds, and My Greatest Adventure. Over the resurfaced lane, these are titles, I think, of comics. I'm not even clear if these are like legitimately sold comics or if this is something they pulled out of boxes as packing material based on the use of the term packing material. So this is ballast. Well, ballast, not packing material. Pardon me. Ballast and packing material serve fundamentally different purposes, although one can be the other. Over the resurfaced lane had stood a melancholy guest house hanging back behind a screen of elders, with existing photos from a date still earlier showing a mill-like structure dominated by a lantern cupola that previously ruled the corner. There was a short row of faceless 1960s houses perched there now, behind the hall overlooking the main road, with tenants hanging on until the area was one day gentrified, part of a cultural mile that council walks had blue skied and attempted to talk up before they sold high and bailed out for somewhere less accusing, somewhere without all the bad dreams trapped like astral rising damp in the foundations. We're back to how it's haunted. Alma had from somewhere the impression that a local counselor had occupied one of the buildings once, but whether he still lived there, she had no idea. Well, thanks for mentioning it. Rounding the corner to their right, they walked down to the lights and crossed St. Andrews Road, continuing to the approach of Castle Station. This was where the sex commuters pulled in at the weekends. Prostitute away teams hot from Milton Keynes or Rugby riding in upon a Silver Link Express to the well-publicized red light zone of the boroughs, the rich pickings of the all-night truck stop on its northwest corner, where the hump of Spencer Bridge met Crane Hill at the foot of Grafton Street, the area's northern boundary. Walking AIDS vectors and their managers routinely filtered through the station forecourt through the former medieval castle where Shakespeare's King John commences, where reputedly they held the world's first parliament during the 13th century and raised the poll tax that sparked off Wat Tyler's uprising of 1381. Everyone knows this. Why are you even going through it? It's so obvious. Where various crusaders were planned, where various crusades were planned, where Becket was condemned, here at the end of the soot-blasted road where Mick and Alma had grown up, their derelict Arcadia. As they descended to the hackney cabs unwinding round the station's yard from its front entrance, Alma was reflecting on the grave enormity of what she'd promised she'd see through. She wasn't going to have to simply do these pictures. She was going to have to do the fuck out of them. This prologue is Titanic. Okay. Where this will be part two.